Hi guys, I hope that you are all having a great Saturday. I am Zooming with a bunch of great ladies today, so I am not live, but we are going to do this video for you so that you can have a great time creating something fun for the fall to decorate your entryway or your kitchen or just your favorite little space in the house and get ready for fall. And today we're going to be painting Happy Fall Y'all, and you can see that fun little stand-up piece in the photo, and then we're going to tackle that today. It's really easy, it's a lot of fun, and it's super cute, and it looks really great in your entryway. So if you guys are ready to get started, so am I. So here we are. I have this great little surface. This is a stand-up pumpkin, and the kit actually comes with the little stand, and it comes with a cutout of a crow, and it has this fun little star. And I just thought it was such a cute little surface, and it created this really cute little piece. So this is what we're painting today. It's called Happy Fall Y'all, and I've already painted it 3 times, and because I've had far too much fun with it, I'm going to gift a couple of them away to some friends. But today we're going to tackle this one, and I think you're going to really enjoy this. So if you're looking for this surface, you can find it. Sorry, wrong one. You can find it at paintingwithdeb.com. Deb's got them up on her website. I will have them up on my website in the next few days, but if you're impatient like I am, then you'll probably want to get ahead of the game, and you can order this surface. It's just called the Stand-Up Pumpkin with a Crow. It's a great little surface, and it's just a fun one to paint, and you can find them on paintingwithdeb.com. And if you're looking for the pattern for this piece, you can find it on my website at tracymoreau.net. And it is an e-packet, and it's an instant download. So once you finish your payment options, the download links will be sent directly to your email. And if you don't see them, then check your junk file, because that's usually where they end up. So that is all you really need to get started on this, is this fun little surface. The supply list is in the pattern packet, so you'll be able to work from that. I'm not using a whole lot of really different colors or unusual colors, so it'll be fairly easy to get the supplies for this. What you are going to need, however, is a stencil, and the one that I've used is this one. This is a 1/2 inch check, just a simple checkerboard stencil. This has a country feel to it, and I kind of like to maintain that, so that's what I've gone with, is this simple checkerboard stencil and a little piece of painter's tape. And we're going to stencil onto this base coated pumpkin. Now the color that I used to base coat this is Prussian blue, and I only used one generous coat of Decor Americana Prussian blue over that surface. It colors really nicely, it finishes up really nicely. You really don't need to have a heavy application, mainly because we're going to be doing a bit of distress work on this. And so we want to be able to wear through this paint a little bit. Now the color that we're stenciling with is this one. It's cobblestone. If you don't have cobblestone, you could use driftwood, you could use pebble, you could use any one of those lighter colored neutrals. You will work just fine. Even a gray sky. It doesn't have to be anything specific. It just needs to be a lighter value gray. I tried to stay away from white simply because it's a very harsh contrast on this dark blue, so I went with this warmer gray. So the brush that I'm using is a Dynasty Stencil Pro, and I'm using my favorite size, which is the 1/2 inch. I love this one. And I've loaded it up with cobblestone, and the brush should be just about dry. We're not looking for absolutely perfect squares here. I just want to fill them in. They don't need to be fully opaque. They don't need to be perfect. We're going to distress them anyway. If they're absolutely opaque, you're going to have a hard time doing that. And then when you find that you're running out of paint, if it's just not filling in, just go and pick up a little more cobblestone. And don't forget to blot it on your paper towel. It'll make things a little easier for you in the end. And then check to make sure that you've got a nice coverage which we do. And then I'm going to line up my stencil and then just continue this check pattern down the pumpkin. Like I said, it doesn't need to be perfect. They don't have to be solid. They don't even have to be complete, to be perfectly honest. It'll give it a nice distressed appearance when they're irregular and imperfect. Just makes things more interesting. Oops, that one got a little too opaque, but it's okay. I had a little too much paint on my brush. I didn't blot, and I should have. So we're almost there. So I have a quick look. Yep, I'm happy with that. And then I'll just reposition and finish off the last 1.5 inches of this pumpkin. This time around, I'll make sure I didn't have too much on there. There we go. I like the imperfections. I find it just makes for a much more interesting finish in the end. Except I've got one bright one right there. So I'm going to dry this. Although the stencil brush was nearly dry, the paint itself is not completely dry. So we just want to make sure that we make it nice and dry before we do the next step. Now I'm using a sanding sponge or a sanding disc for this. You can use whatever you have. If you like a sanding sponge or a disc, whatever works for you in this case. I'm using these ones here. And we're going to sand this, but in one direction and one direction only. So vertically, up and down. And I'm being quite aggressive. I want to wear through the paint at the edges. I like exposing a little bit of that wood surface underneath. So don't be afraid to sand right through it in places. That's okay. As I said, it makes things more interesting. And then you're going to sand so that you distress those checks on there. And I think that will do the trick. And I can use that paper towel to wipe off the dust. Now, I'm going to age this a little bit, and I'm going to do that with my fugly brush, my favorite fugly brush, and a little bit of heavily thinned asphaltum. And if you don't know what that is, it's this one. This is sort of that transparent dark brown called asphaltum. I'm going to thin a little of that out, just with a little bit of water. You can use a little bit of glaze if you want to, but you don't have to. And I'm going to put a wash of this over the whole pumpkin. And I'm putting it on the same way that I sanded. I'm doing it all vertically. And the reason I do that is for a couple of reasons, actually. One, if there's any lines or scratches or gouges in the paint, it's going to catch nicely. And it also creates an interesting pattern. Kind of goes along with that wood grain idea. So we've got a thin wash of asphaltum. Now, by putting that on there, wherever I exposed the MDF or the wood on this surface, it's going to drink it up and give it a stained effect. So it's going to have that vintage feel to it. And then you're going to dry it well. Now, the nice part about this, I love this sort of diffused, rustic look to this. It appeals to me in a lot of ways, and particularly with this blue. It would work with black too. I've done one with a black background and it does work. I just found that the checkerboard was a little too perfect and a little too high contrast, and it didn't have the warmth. Even though I used an Asphaltum, it just didn't have the warmth, and I really like that sort of vintage feel of that dark blue. Not only that, but it really plays up the bright yellow in the sunflower, so it's going to give us a really nice, a nice warm look, which appeals to me in a great many ways. So once you have all of that done, you are ready to trace and transfer that line drawing on. It's not difficult. I cut mine out. I cut the stem off and I cut it out, and I just line things up. The line drawing is to actual size, so it will fit your piece. And then I just tape it in place and transferred it on using white graphite paper. Now, the reason that I dried it so well was so that the graphite will transfer nicely. Otherwise, it makes it difficult to do. So once you have your line drawing transferred on, you're going to start your base coat. Now, the base coat in this particular case, everything gets a light coat of warm white, of thinned warm white. Because we're working on such a dark background, it makes it difficult to get good coverage if you don't have something to break up that black or that dark blue. And so I like to put down a thin coat, just a single coat of warm white. And I find that when I'm working with these brighter yellows and these richer greens, that I get a much better coverage and the colors are so much more vibrant. So it's just a really good idea just to put down that one light coat of thinned warm white, and it works brilliantly. We're going to start with our sunflower up here, and I have mine base coated. I used one coat of warm white, and then I used one coat of sunset gold. I love this yellow. It's just such a great yellow for sunflowers. It's really quite bright. It covers pretty well, even on darker surfaces, it covers pretty well. And it's a nice mid-value yellow for this type of thing. So that's the reason that I use that sunset gold. Now, when I base coated each individual petal separately. And then when I put on the second coat, I covered everything. So I can still see the separation between all of these petals, but I still have a nice base coat down. So we're going to start by shading these sunflowers, and I'm using a 3/8 angled shader. This one is a Dynasty Faux Squirrel. And we're going to use, for a shading color, is going to be Orange Flame. You could use, if you want a more earthy looking sunflower, which I've done from time to time, you can use Red Spice, or you can use Canyon Orange. You just need something with some oomph, some nice bright. I have a personal preference. I really love Orange Flame. It's just such a great orange, and you can deepen it once you're done. So if it isn't quite, yummy enough, you can always deepen it. So to paint the bigger petals on the sunflower, you're going to float, sort of a U-shaped float, at the base of each of these forward petals, just like so. And that float's going to come about halfway up each petal. And I leave a little space on either side so that it forms sort of a little bowl on the petal. There we go. I just love the heat of this orange, and it makes such pretty sunflowers. So I've got that little U-shaped float. Just give me a sec. I'm going to zoom this in just a scooch so you can see a little bit better. There we go. So at the base of each sunflower, you can see that little U-shaped float at the base of each of those petals. And then while that's drying, I'm going to float in between each of these petals, like so, to separate them, like that. And I don't worry too much about whether or not they're dark enough, because I usually go back in with a little bit of asphaltum and deepen all of these floats. Just keeps the orange looking nice and earthy. And it makes such a brilliant, hot sunflower. And I do love my sunflowers. It's an autumnal flower, and I think that's why, because I love the fall. It's my favorite season. As much as I love winter here, I love the snowfall. I love, the cooler temperatures. I like that big bowl of soup for supper on a cold winter day. I love the fire in the fireplace. I love the atmosphere of winter. But for me, my favorite season to get outside, go for walks, and enjoy the weather and the scenery, and even walking on the beach. I love doing it in the fall. It's my favorite time of year. So I have that first shading in, and then we're going to add a little bit of a highlight to these petals. I'm going to do that with a little float of Sunny Day. And I'm only going to use that Sunny Day out at the tip, the very tip of each of those petals. So it is a very small float out there, and it's just going to make these tips of these petals a little bit brighter. That's all. Sunny Day is without a doubt my favorite yellow. That light, I call it candlelight. It's just such a pretty yellow. And it's perfect for this. So there's that little float. It's not a strong float, so make sure you blend it out well. Otherwise, it's going to be a very opaque bit at the tip, and we don't want that. We just want the little bit of light out there. Now, these sunflowers always look a little static and a little stiff until I do the line work at the end. But I think that that's what kind of makes these flowers. So there we go. We've got our little highlight out at the tip of all of those petals. And we're going to deepen those shadings now with a little float of thinned asphaltum. I use asphaltum all the time. I very rarely use it full strength, except when I base coat the center of the flowers. But we're going to use it heavily thinned, and then come in and just deepen right over top of that orange flame. But look what it does to that orange flame. It just deepens it, gives it a little more depth and a little more richness. And it's just such a yummy color. Perfect for fall. And that little bit of contrast just gives these flowers a little more shape and a little more dimension. And if you find that it's not dark enough, you can always put another coat on. That's why I use it thinned, because then you have control. Use it thin and put it on in layers so that you have complete control. So there we go. We have a nice little float of asphaltum. All of our shading is deepened. And now that we've got that in, we can turn to working the rest of this flower. We're going to start with those leaves, and I'm going to be using a number 2 rigger to do the stems. And I'm using a color called Lush Green. I love this color. It's a yummy, earthy green, and it covers quite nicely. So I'm just going to base in the stem with Lush Green. And while I'm here, I'm going to base in the stem of the pumpkin with Lush Green. And this green does cover nicely. have these little leaves off to the side. 1 or 2 coats is going to be plenty. Because we've got that little bit of white down, that coat of warm white on these leaves, we're not having to work against that darker background. So we have better coverage. It's not perfect, but it's better. And I base coat following the shape of the leaf. There we go. And we only need, generally 1 coat is plenty. And this is your chance to take that green nice and tight up to the edge of those petals. It's going to give you a nice finish. Such a fun piece. And who doesn't love sunflowers? I love sunflowers. My bedroom is decorated with sunflowers. Just the cushions. I am not one for what I call wallpaper decorating. I know where every inch of a room is covered in the item that is prevalent in there. So I have sunflowers, but they're on things like the toss cushions and whatnot. I love them. They're bright, they're happy, they're homey, welcoming. Who doesn't love a sunflower? So there we go. We've got lush green. Our base coat is in. I'm going to dry this real quick, and then we're going to do the shading for these, which is super quick. The shading on this is very simple. And the color that I'm using for my shading on these leaves is plantation pine. Probably my favorite dark green. I like this one because it's very transparent. It's a nice rich dark green, and therefore you can layer it. So you get, the more layers you put on, the deeper it gets. And so it's ideal for shading these leaves. And as I said, this piece works up really quickly. So it's a very friendly piece. So I'm going to start by shading underneath the sunflower and underneath these leaves with a float of that plantation pine. And we want it fairly dark, very close to the flower, up underneath those petals. So don't be afraid to put a couple of layers in. Just because it's a dark color doesn't mean that it's, well, it is a scary color for some of us, but don't be afraid to put some on. Remember, it's just paint. If you make a mistake, you can always paint over it. So I'm just going to float a little of that gorgeous plantation pine up underneath those petals so that I have nice dark shadows under there. I'm going to dry this so that you can see them. All you're seeing is a shiny spot right now. So look at that. See, we've got this really nice little shadow up under there. And I'm going to do the same thing underneath this leaf, like so. So it's going to separate these two leaves and give us nice depth. And then on the stem, we're going to put a little float right there underneath that leaf and underneath this leaf. And then behind the pumpkin, I'm going to put a little float there too, so that we have a dark, a light, and a dark on the stem, and we're going to do the same thing above this here. So we have a nice dark and a light and a dark. And at the base of this little leaf that's off to the side here, I'm going to put a little C-shaped or U-shaped float right at the base of the leaf where it joins the stem. And then here on the stem of the pumpkin as well. Just like that. So we have a nice shadow to the right on the stem, and down into that little curve here, got a little float of that plantation pine. And I'm going to make sure that those are good and dry. And then we're going to add the center vein to these leaves. So with that plantation pine, I'm going to start up here where it joins the stem, and I'm going to pull it out and then down to the point of the leaf, like so. And then across the top here. So I have a nice little center vein, and then I have this nice rounded out feeling at the top of the leaf. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one. There we go. So we have a nice little center vein on both of these leaves. And I'm going to quickly put one in on this one as well. There we go. So we have our shading on our leaves. Super simple. So now you should be able to see it a little bit better. I'm afraid the lighting overhead is sort of glaring it out, but there you should be able to see that nice shading. So we are ready to start putting in some highlights. Now, the color that I chose for the highlights for this is this one. It's Sprout. I love this green. It's a little opaque. It has a fair amount of white in it, but it has that really nice high acid green, and it works really well for this. It gives us a nice bright highlight on our leaves, and it's going to help us create a little bit of texture too at the same time. So I'm loading my brush as if to float, and I'm going to blend it out very well. I don't want this colorful strength. And I'm going to start on this leaf up here, and I'm going to make, remember those little U-shaped floats that I talked about? I'm going to make 4 or 5 of those little U-shaped things at the edge of the leaf. So it just gives me a little bit of a stagger. So I do one, and then I leave a narrow little space and do another one. So I've done 2 or 3 down the side there. I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Oops, too much paint. There we go. So there. So it helps us create a little texture, and it shows up really well right there. But it creates sort of a serrated edge on our leaf. I'm going to do it a little stronger so that you can see it. There we go. So that little bit just helps create a little visual texture at the edges of those leaves. And I didn't have enough paint in my brush. I just love the texture this creates. Makes the leaves a bit more interesting. So once you've done that, I'm going to dry that. And then I'm going to use that same color to put a nice little float down that center vein. So this is going to give our leaves that nice bright highlight that we need right there. And a little bit there. And I'm going to come over and put a little bit over here too. So now we have these really nice, interesting leaves with a little bit of texture and a little bit of pattern. And I'm going to rinse that out. And then we only have one more place to put a little highlight. I'm going to put a little bit on the left side of that stem, just a little float. And then I'm going to put some on the left side of that stem on the pumpkin as well. And this just helps create a little bit more dimension. And then I'm going to come back in and deepen the shading just a little bit. It's going to make things a little bit more cohesive. So up underneath, little float, just cleans everything up nicely. Gives us a nice shape, just like that. So now we have these nice full leaves. And then we have our pumpkin. So I'm going to use a little bit of warm white, and I'm going to grab a nice big round brush using a number 5, I think. And I'm going to add a little water or a little glaze to my paint, but I don't want to thin it out too much because I want this to cover. So I'm going to, with that round, put down a nice base coat following the shape of that segment. So you can see that it's curved, and so I want the brush strokes to remain, but I want them to follow the shape of that pumpkin. And I'm not too worried about covering up the lines that define the segments because I can still see them through the paint. Not heavily, but I can see them. And I want these to have that texture, so I'm not worried about brushing out really smooth. I want to retain a few brush marks. The brush marks are fine, but I want to make sure that they're there under my auspices, under control. So there is our white. We have a nice white pumpkin with lots of brush marks in it. That's the way I like it. So I'm going to dry this real quick. And then we're going to we're going to put a shadow underneath our pumpkin so that he's nicely grounded to the surface. I'm just using a little bit of lamp black. It serves two purposes. One, it gives me a nice shadow underneath, but it also lets me clean up my pumpkin a little bit. So if he's got a few little rough edges, I can sharpen them up with this float. So just a nice little float, just to ground that pumpkin. And I'm going to grab my 1/2 inch, I've got a water lily, a 1/2 inch angled shader. We're going to use one of my favorite colors, Bahama Blue. I love Bahama Blue. I like it particularly for shading whites. It's nice and cool, but yet you can still make it kind of earthy. So again, I am side loading this to float, but I am not using it full strength. So little float down those creases is where the bulk of that color goes. So in the crease of the pumpkin, like so. I'm going to put a little bit of that Bahama blue. I love me some Bahama blue. And this is just what's going to shape our pumpkin. So in those creases, to separate each of those segments of the pumpkin, that's where that Bahama blue is going. And then we're going to use that Bahama blue to do the actual shading. And so I need to shade that segment, that center segment of the pumpkin, like so. And we're going to shade along the bottom of the pumpkin as well, like that. And it just helps shape our pumpkin very nicely. Gives it a little more dimension, a little more interest. And it's still a white pumpkin, even though I'm using a lot of blue. So we have a nice blue pumpkin. So I'm going to dry this, and then I'm going to use some asphaltum to tone this. And what that means is I don't want this blue to go away completely, but I want it to be in keeping with everything else. We used asphaltum for the background. We used asphaltum for the toning on the petals. You know, we've used it everywhere to tone things, to bring it all into this sort of vintage feel. So I'm going to use it again for our pumpkin. So I thin this out quite a bit. I very rarely, as I said, use this color full strength. So I'm going to float right over that Bahama blue and down those segments. And it just helps give everything that sort of vintagey, rustic, country feel without killing all the color completely. Don't want to do that. So I'm going to, I love this. Love that it makes it look like an old-fashioned, and then do the same thing over my shading. So just bringing in that asphaltum, let it come out over the white, it's okay. It's just going to give us this nice vintage feel, this nice distressed feel to it. And there we have a pumpkin. So I'm not done with this pumpkin by any means. I'm going to use a little bit of warm white, and I'm going to brighten the highlight areas of my pumpkin with just a little wash of warm white. So in those highlighted areas, far left, upper left, I want to see some of that white because that's where the light is striking our piece. There's that little bit of white. And you can also dry brush this a little bit if you like. But don't forget that even those areas where we have shading, we need to have a little bit of that light. So make sure you get some of that white in there. And then I like that little impact point, so I use a little stroke, little comma stroke of that warm white. I just find it makes for a much nicer highlight on these pumpkins. Keeps them nice and bright. And it gives them a painterly look as well. So we have a nice white pumpkin. And that didn't take long. Did not take long to work that up. So we do have to add a whole bunch of fun little details to this. And I'm going to do that with my 10-aught extra long detail liner. It's my favorite liner brush. And I'm going to thin out a little bit of that sprout, and I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of warm white. I just want to make that a little bit more opaque. Just a little. And this is the color that I like. I love doing this. I'm going to use this color at the edges of my leaves. I just use a very loose squiggly line at the edges of my leaves. It's not a hard-edged line. I don't like hard edges. It's just something to soften the lines of these leaves a little bit. And you can go back over. They don't have to be perfect. They can be overlapping. It just softens the leaves, gives them a nice delicate look. And we're going to use that same color to connect this small leaf and add that squiggly line to it as well. And we're going to use that for our little vines and tendrils. And I like it on my pumpkin as well. I like to have that little squiggly curly-Q type line, but it has to come right off of the end of your pumpkin stem here. There we go. So our leaves are done, our vines are done. I'm going to come up here to the center of our sunflower. Now I'm going to use a little bit of lamp black. And I found that for a lot of us, it's intimidating to use to float just with black, especially on something like this. So I'm going to put a float along the bottom of our sunflower center. It's going to come up about halfway. Just a nice little float. It's just going to give our flower a little dimension in the middle. So I'm going to dry that real quick, and then there's a circle in the center of our flower. I'm going to float inside that circle with the lamp black. And about the same, so about halfway up on either side. So I've got a half circle here and another half circle there. And that gives us that little dip in the middle of our sunflower. And so it's time to start highlighting this. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I like doing it with a small deer foot. But you could do it with almost any brush, but I'm going to use this one. This is my 1/4 inch Dynasty from the 300 series. It's a small natural hair deerfoot. And I'm going to pick up asphaltum, and I'm going to pounce it so that I have asphaltum in my brush. And then while it's dirty, I'm going to pick up a little bit of that sprout on the tip of my brush. And you're going to pounce it on your palette until the two colors blend. And it's going to create a sort of muddy look like this. And I'm going to complete that half circle in the middle. So there we go. So I completed my little half circle, and it made just a soft highlight on the inside of that little divot. And I'm going to repeat that on the outside as well. So keeping that lightest value to the outside edge, like so. I'm just going to stipple that color along till I meet up with that shadow. So again, about halfway. Just like that. And it's double loaded, so it's not going to leave you with a hard seam. So just blend those. There we go. So it's a nice soft highlight at the top. But you still have to highlight the other side of this. So again, pick up a little asphaltum and then pick up a little bit of that sprout, and you're going to stipple halfway, like so. And that little stipple gives you a really nice little highlight in the center of your flower and helps you create sort of that little sunken bit in the middle. So we have our highlight in. So we're going to dry that real quick. And then we're going to deepen the shading a little bit, just so that things stay nice. I'm going to come back in with a little float, just deepen it a little of that thinned lamp black, just so that we've got nice, consistent shadows. That's all. There we go. So I will dry that. And then we're going to put some dip dots in there. I'm a big fan of dip dots. I like dip dots. You don't have to use a lot. You don't have to use any if you'd rather not. That's entirely up to you. But in this particular case, I like my dip dots. And I'm using a little bit of Sunny Day. Okay. I had a drop of water on there that doesn't want to dry, but there we go. So I'm using a little bit of Sunny Day. And the thing about Sunny Day that I just love is that it is bright. And I'm going to use a few. I don't want hundreds of them on, but I do like to compass the edge of the flower a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing on this highlighted side of the middle. Make sure you compass the edge just a little. I'm not looking for perfect dip dots. I kind of like them scattered and soft in various sizes. I just think it makes things more interesting. And then I'm going to take my dirty brush and I'm going to dip dot with just a few of the white. And again, I come out past the edge just a little. Again, I don't want to have a ton of them. But these little dots just keep things soft. So there we go. And you can do the same thing with a little bit of asphaltum or a little bit of lamp black and just finish out, you know, with that. Just continue the texture a little, which I kind of like, just with a little bit of asphaltum. And it comes down over the black and a few sort of travel up into the more highlighted section. It just makes things feel a bit more natural. So that's all you have to do for the center. So now we get to have a little bit of fun, because I love the detailing part of any of this. This is my favorite part. I'm going to grab my 0.38 black gel pen, and we're going to add a little bit of texture to our petals. And I do that with 3 little lines, like so on these forward petals. Keep it simple, don't overthink it. Just like that. And then 1 on the back petal, sorry. And then you're just a little squiggly line around the outside edge of the center. Because that's how I like it. And that's the gel pens. I stock these on my website. You can find them in the supply section, in the tools and supply section. There's only 3 pens that I really keep in there. I keep this one, which is the Uniball Signo 0.38 in the black gel. I use the red gel, and I have the Uniball Signo in white. as the white, opaque white gel pen. These are the only ones that I use right here. And we stock all 3 of them on the website. These are my favorites. And we're going to use this one too. So the gel just adds fun little details to things. I like that squiggly lines. I'm a fan of squiggly lines. So we're going to create that dimension in these petals. And myself, I just think this is fun. I like the dimension of this. And I'm using my 10-aught extra long detail liner. And this helps give the petals on this a bit more shape. It helps define them really nicely. And it softens them dramatically. So where you see the outside of that float, you're going to press down so that you get sort of a little teardrop of that sunny day, and then you squiggle out to the point. And it helps create that little cup in the petals. So press down, back up on the point, and a little squiggly line out to the end. I like the little squiggly line. I think it softens these petals, it makes them look pretty. And things just take on a really nice soft look. And that little teardrop at the edge, as I said, it just gives the leaf that curved, or the petal that cupped appearance. And then you're going to do the same thing, just a fine little line to all of those little background petals, just to give the edges a little more interest. Just softens them, makes them look pretty. And it adds a little bit of light and highlight to our sunflower. So there we go. We have the details on there. So the only thing left to do for this piece is, of course, to put the happy fall y'all in. And I did this with my white gel pen, my opaque white gel pen, for a couple of reasons. One, super simple. 2, I have it, might as well use it. And 3, it's a lot easier than trying to do this tiny little lettering with a liner brush or a zero rigger. And this nice bright white, these, I love these pens. They write really nicely. So there's Happy Fall Y'all. I don't know, it sounds funny, somebody from Nova Scotia calling it y'all. But it's fun. So I've done my lettering, and that's with Uniball Signo opaque white. Love that pen. And so the last thing I have to do for this piece is a little bit of spattering. And I love spatter. I spatter everything because I just like how it looks. So I start with a little bit of warm white, just thinned. I use my fugly brush for this. And again, I like spatter, so I tend to spatter it. Not a heavy spatter, but lots of it. So I get a nice fine white spatter on there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with a little bit of asphaltum. If you prefer, you can use a little bit of lamp black, but I prefer a little asphaltum. I just find that it's a little more subtle. The black's a little harsh. And again, you can use as much or as little of this as you like. It's your piece. So I'm going to set this little guy aside, and then we're going to, pardon me, work on the finishing elements for this, which are super fun because we're going to paint a little crow and we're going to paint a star. Now the crow is really easy to paint. What we're going to do his beak first, and I'm using sunset gold, same color that's in our sunflower. And I'm just going to put a float of it at the tip of the nose, like so. I'm not putting a lot on. I'm not worried about making it fully opaque. Just putting a little one on there. So he has a nose. I just think he's fun this way. Now, there was a thought occurred to me after I got this all finished that it would have been fun to use a smaller check to do our bird, but I chose to do something even simpler. So I went with a float of warm white. And you're going to thin this color out quite a bit because you don't want it full strength. And I'm going to just float some simple feathers on. Nothing too extravagant. And so there's in the line drawing, you can see that we gave you a couple of ideas for how to lay these feathers in. So that's all I did, was just a little U-shaped float with a little thinned warm white. Comme ça. Super simple. And then I'm going to spatter him as well. And I'm going to use a little bit of asphaltum. And then I'm going to repeat that with a little bit of warm white, because he's just as distressed as the rest of it. So a little bit of warm white. And he needs an eyeball, I think. So I used the end of my brush, and just where his beak starts to fade, I put a dot of white. And I'm going to set him aside to dry, and then we'll add a few little details to him. Now the star I base coated with a little bit of Sunny Day, because I decided that I needed a nice bright star. But I'm going to shade him on one side, and I'm going to do the one side with a float of that sunset gold. Remember the base color we used for the sunflowers? So a little float of that on one side, like so. I keep pulling it out of the shot, I'm sorry. And then I'm going to dry that, and then we're going to float the other side with a little bit of orange flame. Now, this one is a little button, a little star-shaped button, which I thought was so cute. So, little float of orange flame on the other side so that we have a nice glowing star, like so. And I'm going to dry it, and then we'll deepen that with a little float of asphaltum. So I like to deepen things. So just a little float of asphaltum on the shaded side. It's going to give our orange a nice deep look. There we go. And we'll dry that, and I'm going to use my gel pen again. Just make sure this is good and dry. And I like to go around the inside, just slightly on the inside edge, and put a squiggly line all the way around. Neatness doesn't count for this. Perfection is to be avoided. And then I just scribble over that line so that it goes on both sides of that line, so it's imperfect. Like so. Super easy. So from here, the only thing I really need to do is to make sure that my eyeball has a little black dot. So I'm going to just add a little black dot to the center of that bird's eye. And I have some fun little twine. You could use baker's twine. I'm going to use a little piece of this just to string through the button. And then the button is glued Couldn't find my glue there for a second. The button is glued to the crow. You can embellish this afterwards too if you prefer. We're going to glue this button onto the crow, and then we're going to glue the crow to the pumpkin, like so. Now, if you want to, you can put a small piece of wood on the back, a button, or just something about the same thickness as the wood to give it a little elevation, or you can just glue it directly onto the pumpkin, which is what I'm going to do here. I've done it both ways, and they look good either way, so I'm not too concerned. The only thing I will tell you is that notice this little tab at the base of the pumpkin. That's going to fit into the stand. So we kind of want the bottom of the bird to allow for the stand. So I just try to keep that bird slightly above the edge of that, like so. And the stand is actually very simple. It's 2 pieces of MDF, and you just simply glue them together. One side has a small slot for this to fit into. Once this portion is dried, I painted it black, and then in the slot I ran a small bead of glue, and then I just snapped the pumpkin into it and left it to dry well. And there you have Happy Fall, y'all. It's super easy. It's a lot of fun to paint. It does not take long. It actually works up pretty quickly. And they're so cute when they're finished. So you could use a little bit of glitter or a little leaf or something else, autumnal that you wanted to put there. Or in this case, I used just a little piece of twine tied in a little bow and glued it on there, and it was really cute. Or you could add a little bit of raffia if you like. It is not a difficult project to paint. It is a lot of fun to paint, and it's actually a really affordable surface. I was very pleasantly surprised. It was not an expensive surface, and you could use this particular surface for all kinds of fun projects for Halloween or for the fall. So guys, I hope that you really enjoyed painting this with me today. And if you're watching this on a rerun, if you didn't get a chance to watch it on the day, the surface is called the Standing Pumpkin with Crow and Star, and it is available from paintingwithdeb.com. And if you are looking for the pattern for this, it is available on my website. You can find it on the front page of the website under the video live, that will be still up there for the rest of the week. So that is it. Happy fall, y'all. I hope you had fun with this. And I missed seeing all of you guys today. I know I did. Because I haven't missed you yet, but I will, I promise. I'll check in with you today, hopefully. And if you have a birthday today, happy birthday. And if I don't get to chat with you, if you are not part of my membership group and I don't get to chat with you this week, please stay safe. And I will see you on video next Saturday, September 16th. You'll be able to watch. We have a fun little birdhouse project for you, again, with some fun sunflowers and some unusual color choices. So I will see you again soon. Please take care and stay safe. We love you. Bye.